Have you ever felt your entire world collapse beneath your feet? That moment when everything you thought was true suddenly means nothing? I never imagined that discovering truth would cost me everything I loved. My name is Aisha, and what I'm about to share with you changed my life forever. Some moments test us in ways we never thought possible, and mine came when I had to choose between my family and what my heart knew to be true. Before I continue, I want to ask you something important. Please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Lagos, London, New York, or anywhere else in this world, let's connect as one family. We need to pray for each other, support each other, and remember that none of us walks this journey alone. My story began in 2024, though I suppose the seeds were planted long before I realized it. I was 31 years old then, living in Manchester with my parents and 3 younger siblings. The autumn rain had just started its usual dance against our windows, and I remember thinking how ordinary that Tuesday morning felt. I had no idea that ordinary was about to become a word from my past. I worked as a nurse at Royal Manchester Hospital. That dream had lived inside me since I was 7 years old, watching my grandmother receive care in her final days. The nurses who attended to her moved with such grace and compassion that I told myself I would become just like them. My mother loved telling people that nursing wasn't just my profession but my calling. She said I was born with healing hands and a servant's heart. The university years at Liverpool had shaped me in ways I never expected. I met Sarah there, a girl from my anatomy class who became my closest friend. Sarah came from Pakistan, and through her, my world expanded beyond the familiar boundaries of my childhood. She invited me to study sessions where students from Egypt, Somalia, Indonesia, and Morocco gathered. I learned that the world was bigger and more beautiful than I had imagined. One evening in late March 2024, I sat with Sarah in the university library. We were supposed to be reviewing cardiovascular systems, but she seemed distracted. She kept glancing at a small green book beside her laptop. The cover had gold Arabic writing that looked like art to my untrained eyes. I asked her about it. Sarah's face lit up with a gentle smile as she told me it was an English translation of the Quran. She explained that she tried to read it daily, that it brought her peace in the chaos of medical school. Something about the way she spoke made me curious. There was a calmness in her voice, a certainty that I had never quite felt about my own faith. Sarah's brother Khalid visited campus the following week. He came to drop off some books Sarah had left at home. I happened to be with her when he arrived. What struck me immediately was his demeanor. Khalid spoke softly, smiled genuinely, and when an elderly woman struggled with a heavy door, he rushed to help without being asked. It seemed natural to him, this kindness. Sarah later told me that charity and helping others were fundamental parts of their faith, not just occasional good deeds but a way of life. That resonated with me deeply. As a nursing student, I understood the call to serve others. I had spent countless hours volunteering at homeless shelters and organizing blood drives. But Sarah and Khalid approached helping others differently. They did it with a spiritual motivation I didn't quite understand yet. I asked Sarah if I could borrow her Quran translation. She handed it to me the next day, telling me to take all the time I needed. She said something I'll never forget. She told me that this book wasn't like other books, that I shouldn't rush through it but let each word settle in my heart. I started reading that night in my tiny flat. Usually, I devoured books quickly, sometimes finishing novels in one sitting. But Sarah was right. The Quran demanded something different from me. Each verse felt heavy with meaning, like trying to hold water in my hands while understanding its essence simultaneously. I found myself reading a single page multiple times, feeling something stir inside me that I couldn't name. One verse particularly gripped me. It spoke about how God created humans and jinn only to worship Him. The simplicity of that purpose struck me. My entire life, I had searched for meaning in achievements, relationships, and career goals. But what if life's purpose was simpler and more profound than all of that? The weeks turned into months. Spring became summer, and I continued reading. My shifts at the hospital took on new meaning. When I held the hand of a dying patient, I thought about God's control over life and death. When I witnessed a miraculous recovery, I wondered about divine will. The Quran spoke about these things with such certainty that I felt both comforted and unsettled. I realized something crucial during those months. I had always believed in God, but my understanding felt incomplete, like looking at a puzzle with missing pieces. The concept of one God, singular and without partners, began making sense to me in ways my previous beliefs never had. The Quran emphasized God's oneness repeatedly, and each mention felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed in my heart. By September 2024, I had finished reading the entire translation. It took me nearly 4 months, but I felt transformed. My heart testified to something my mind was still processing. I found myself thinking about God throughout my days in ways I never had before. At work, I would see the intricate design of the human body and think about the Creator who fashioned it so perfectly. But knowledge and conviction are different from action. I felt paralyzed between two worlds. My family was deeply rooted in our church community. My father served as a deacon, my mother led the women's ministry, and my younger sister sang in the choir. How could I tell them that my heart was pulling me toward a different path? Then October arrived with news that shattered our family. My youngest brother James, only 19 years old, died in a car accident. One moment he was texting me about his plans for the weekend, and the next, police officers stood at our door with expressions that told us everything before they spoke a word. The grief was unbearable. I felt like I was drowning in darkness with no surface in sight. But in that darkness, something became clear. I realized with absolute certainty that I controlled nothing. Not life, not death, not even my next breath. Everything belonged to God, and He alone decided when our time came. That night, after everyone had gone to bed exhausted from crying, I sat alone in my room. The translated Quran lay on my desk where I had left it weeks ago. I picked it up and held it against my chest, and I whispered into the silence that I believed. I believed in one God, in His prophets, in His books, in His angels, in the day of judgment, in His divine decree. I believed, and I wanted to submit. I called Sarah the next morning. My voice shook as I told her what had happened to James and what had happened in my heart. She cried with me, and then she told me about a center in Manchester where I could officially embrace Islam. She offered to come with me, but I asked her to let me do this alone. Some journeys we must walk by ourselves. On a grey Thursday afternoon in late October 2024, I entered the Islamic Center on Stockport Road. My hands trembled as I approached the sister at the reception. She had kind eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. I told her why I had come. She smiled gently and led me to a quiet room where 2 other sisters waited. They explained what would happen, asking me if I understood what I was about to do. I nodded. One of them, Sister Fatima, asked me if I was certain, if I understood that accepting Islam meant worshipping only Allah and accepting Muhammad as his final messenger. I told her I was certain, that my heart had already decided, and my tongue was just catching up. I spoke the words that would change everything. I testified that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. As those words left my lips, I felt something break and something else being born inside me. Sister Fatima hugged me tightly, and I cried into her shoulder, though I couldn't explain if they were tears of joy, fear, or relief. Perhaps all 3. For 2 weeks, I kept my conversion private. I told no one except Sarah. I learned how to pray 5 times daily, stumbling through the movements and Arabic words like a child learning to walk. I wore my regular clothes but felt different inside, like I was carrying a beautiful secret that both thrilled and terrified me. But secrets have a way of demanding to be told. I knew I couldn't hide this from my family forever. Islam wasn't just a private belief but a complete way of life. I wanted to wear hijab, to pray openly, to live according to my new faith. That meant telling my family, and I dreaded that conversation more than anything I had ever faced. I chose a Sunday afternoon in mid-November. My parents sat in the living room reading the newspaper when I asked if we could talk. My mother looked up with concern, probably still raw from losing James. I sat across from them, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told them I had something important to share. I explained how I had been reading and learning about Islam over the past months. I described how it had brought me peace and answers to questions I had always carried. Then I said the words I had been rehearsing for days. I told them I had accepted Islam, that I was now Muslim. The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours, though it was probably only seconds. My father's face went from confusion to disbelief to something harder I couldn't quite read. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and she made a sound like she had been physically struck. My father spoke first. His voice was quiet but sharp. He asked me if I understood what I was saying, if I knew what this meant for our family. He reminded me of our church community, of my grandparents who had been founding members, of everything we stood for. He said I was confused, that grief over James had clouded my judgment. I tried to explain that this wasn't about grief but about truth. I told them I had never been more certain of anything in my life. My mother started crying, asking me how I could do this to them. She said it felt like losing two children, first James and now me. Those words cut deeper than any knife could. My younger sister Emma, who had been listening from the stairs, came down and told me I was being selfish and crazy. She said I was betraying everything our family believed in. My other brother Marcus just stared at me like I had become a stranger. That night, I heard my parents arguing in their room. My mother's sobs carried through the walls. I lay in bed thinking about the early Muslims who had faced similar situations, who had chosen faith over family approval. I prayed for strength, for patience, for guidance. The next morning, my father informed me that I needed to leave. He said he couldn't have someone in his house who had rejected Christianity. His voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. My mother stood behind him, her eyes red from crying, but she didn't protest his decision. I packed my belongings into 3 suitcases and several bags. 31 years of life reduced to what could fit in my small car. Emma and Marcus didn't come out of their rooms to say goodbye. As I loaded the last bag, my mother came outside. She handed me an envelope with some money and told me she loved me but couldn't support my decision. She said she would pray I came to my senses. Sarah took me in immediately when I called her. Her family welcomed me into their home without judgment. But the pain of losing my family consumed me. I had expected disappointment, maybe some arguments, but not complete rejection. Not being cast out like I was dead to them. The persecution that followed was subtle but relentless. Someone from my church must have spread the news because I started receiving messages on social media. People I had known my entire life sent me paragraphs about how I was going to hell, how I had been deceived by evil, how Islam was a religion of darkness. Former friends blocked me without explanation. At work, things became uncomfortable. A few colleagues who learned about my conversion started treating me differently. One nurse I had worked with for 3 years told me she couldn't be friends with someone who followed a false prophet. Another spread rumors that I might be radicalized, which led to an awkward meeting with my supervisor. The hospital administration was professional, but I could feel the shift in how some people regarded me. Patients occasionally requested different nurses when they saw my hijab. I heard whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. The isolation was crushing. But the worst persecution came from my own family's continued rejection. I tried calling my mother several times. She answered once, crying, begging me to come back to church, to renounce Islam. When I gently explained that I couldn't deny what my heart knew to be true, she told me not to call again until I was ready to return to my senses. My father sent me a single email in December. He wrote that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings, that my choice had consequences, and that I needed to understand I had broken their hearts. He said they would pray for me, but until I returned to Christianity, I was choosing to be separate from the family. Christmas was unbearably painful. I spent it with Sarah's family, who treated me with incredible kindness. But I couldn't stop thinking about my own family gathered without me, about the empty space at the table where I should have been. I wondered if they thought about me too, if they missed me, or if their hurt had turned into hardness. The emotional toll was devastating. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Not about Islam itself, I never doubted the truth I had found, but about whether I was strong enough to bear the cost. I had read about tests and trials in the Quran, but experiencing them was different from reading about them. My workplace persecution escalated in January 2025. A patient's family member complained about having a Muslim nurse, claiming they didn't feel safe. The incident was investigated, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the accusation stung. I felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove myself, to show that my faith didn't make me less professional or compassionate. One evening, as I walked to my car after a long shift, someone had written hateful words across my windshield. The slurs they used made me feel dirty and small. I sat in that car and cried until my eyes burned. I thought about the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, about how they faced persecution so much worse than mine, and I prayed for even a fraction of their strength. Sarah found me an apartment in February. Living with her family had been a blessing, but I needed my own space. The tiny flat was in a predominantly Muslim area, and I felt safer there. My neighbors were kind, greeting me with warm smiles and offers of food. Slowly, I was building a new community, though it could never replace the family I had lost. I threw myself into learning my new faith. I attended classes at the mosque, learning to read Quran in Arabic, studying the life of the Prophet Muhammad, understanding Islamic jurisprudence. The more I learned, the more certain I became that I had made the right choice. But certainty didn't ease the loneliness. My mother sent me a message on my birthday in April. She wrote that she still loved me and always would, but she couldn't watch me destroy my soul. She said the door was always open if I wanted to come home, but home meant abandoning Islam. I cried reading that message because I knew I could never walk through that door on those terms. The persecution took forms I hadn't anticipated. Old friends from church organized prayer meetings for my soul, posting about them on social media where I could see. They meant well, I suppose, but it felt like they were treating me like I was dead or possessed. Some sent me long messages with Bible verses, trying to convince me I had been led astray. One particularly painful incident happened in June. My sister Emma was getting married, something we had dreamed about together since we were children. I received no invitation. When I reached out to ask if I could at least attend, she told me my presence would upset our parents and ruin her day. She said she loved me but couldn't have someone who rejected Jesus at her Christian wedding. I didn't attend Emma's wedding. Instead, I spent that Saturday volunteering at a food bank organized by the mosque. I tried to focus on helping others, on being useful, but my heart ached thinking about my sister walking down the aisle without me there. I wondered if she thought about me even for a moment on her special day. The emotional persecution was worse than any physical harm could have been. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my family's life. I saw their social media posts, their family gatherings, their celebrations, all continuing without me. They had cut me out like excising a tumor, and the wound wouldn't heal. Work remained difficult. Despite my excellent performance reviews, I was passed over for a promotion I was qualified for. My supervisor never said it explicitly, but I suspected my hijab and faith played a role. I felt invisible and hypervisible at the same time, ignored for opportunities but constantly watched for any mistake. But amid all the persecution and pain, something beautiful was growing. My faith deepened. Every hardship drove me closer to Allah. When I prayed, I felt a connection that sustained me through the darkest moments. The Quran's verses about patience and perseverance became my lifeline. I found strength in the stories of the early Muslims. When I felt alone, I remembered Sumaya, the first martyr in Islam, who refused to renounce her faith even facing torture. When I missed my family, I thought about the Prophet Muhammad, who was rejected by his own tribe. These stories reminded me I wasn't the first to walk this painful path, and I wouldn't be the last. By autumn 2025, a year after my conversion, I had built a new life. It looked nothing like the life I had planned, but it was mine, authentic and rooted in truth. The persecution hadn't stopped, my family remained distant, work was still challenging, and I faced discrimination regularly. But I had also found peace in ways I never knew existed. I learned that choosing faith over comfort is perhaps the hardest choice a person can make. Every day, I woke up choosing Allah over my family's approval, over societal acceptance, over the easier path. And every day, that choice became both harder and easier, harder because the losses remained fresh, easier because my conviction grew stronger. Sarah remained my closest friend, my sister in Islam. The mosque community embraced me, providing the family I had lost. I met other converts who shared similar stories of rejection and persecution. We formed a support group, gathering monthly to share our struggles and strengthen each other. I wasn't alone, even when I felt most isolated. My nursing work took on new meaning. I tried to embody Islamic principles of compassion and service in every interaction. When patients were rude or families complained about my hijab, I responded with patience and professionalism. I wanted to show through my actions what Islam truly represented. There are moments, still, when the pain overwhelms me. Mother's Day is particularly difficult. My birthday. Christmas. Moments when I desperately want my mother's hug or my father's approval. I wonder if they think about me during these times, if they miss me as much as I miss them. But I have learned something crucial through this persecution. Faith isn't just about believing when it's easy or convenient. Real faith is tested in fire, refined through suffering, proven through sacrifice. My Islam means more because it cost me everything. Every prayer I make carries the weight of that cost, and every prostration is sweeter because I know what I gave up to make it. To anyone reading this, whether you're struggling with faith, facing persecution, or trying to understand someone else's journey, I want you to know this. Truth sometimes demands everything from us. It asks us to surrender comfort, approval, and even beloved relationships. The cost is real and devastating. But on the other side of that cost is something transcendent. I found God in ways I never knew possible. I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that belonging to Allah is worth more than belonging to any human community, even family. My story isn't finished. Perhaps one day my family will soften, will see that my conversion didn't make me evil or lost but rather found. Perhaps we will rebuild broken bridges. Or perhaps the distance will remain. Either way, I will continue walking this path, choosing faith over fear, truth over comfort. The persecution continues in small ways and large. But so does my certainty. So does my peace. So does my submission to the one who created me, who knows me completely, who loves me perfectly. That submission makes every hardship bearable and every loss meaningful. I am Aisha. I am a nurse, a daughter, a sister, a friend. I am also a Muslim, and that identity cost me everything I once held dear. But it gave me something infinitely more precious, it gave me truth. And truth, once found, can never be abandoned, no matter the price. Dear Christian brothers and sisters across the world, I share my story not to cause pain but to inspire compassion. Many people around the world face persecution for their faith, people who choose truth over comfort, conviction over convenience. I ask you to pray for them. Pray for those who suffer for believing, regardless of what they believe. Pray that they find strength, that their families find understanding, and that love triumphs over division.